back and look at what the market needs. So with that being said, we brought two of our favorite guys on here that are experts in this area because not only of the experience that they bring to this, but actively working right now, have been working through COVID through this. So COVID didn't shut us down, didn't actually, that's when we launched of all times, and have kept going. So we all have enough experience in the industry that we know how to zig and zag. And so that's what we're going to kind of be talking about today is some of the things that go on with land entitlement and some of the ways the developers have to zig and zag and how that can impact investors as well. So if you guys have questions, there is at the bottom of your screen, if you're on your Zoom screen, at the bottom, there is a Q&A section. If you guys want to put any questions that you have for either Andy, Chris, or myself, put that in that Q&A section, or you can use the chat box. Either way, we have enabled that. So if you can get it in either one of those anytime along this, if you have specific questions you would like to see answered, that will be your opportunity to place and go ahead and do that in there. And then that way we'll get to those questions. We'll have time at the end as well. So in the meantime, let me introduce one of my cohorts in crime, or many times, actually not crime, but all the good things that go on in this world. Andy McMullen with Legacy Acquisitions. Andy, how about you tell them a little bit about yourself and what makes you so super cool?
Oh yeah, nothing really makes me super cool, especially if you ask my kids. But I think the thing that I did want to hit. So I've been in this game about over 20 years, and so we've been in multiple cycles. So you mentioned that we're kind of coming through COVID, and what's so I think interesting about development now is that it started to make a lot more sense for people based on what did happen during COVID, right? The idea that I don't want to live with my mom or my roommates during the day and night. I would rather be partying during the day and living somewhere else at night. So that kind of has brought up a lot of this, the demand for housing. But the other thing is that people don't think about is the right now is likely to change. It might be 1 year, it might be 2 years, but because of that, there's always opportunities right now, depending on how you underwrite your deals. And while a lot of people are scared and fearful, it's kind of this great opportunity for you that doesn't come along. It certainly hasn't been along in the last 10 years. So that's kind of my spiel. But Chris Font, who we met, gosh, 3-4 years ago now, has been doing this very thing for large institutions for years. So why I think this is going to be so neat for the audience is you'll be able to hear a little bit about kind of the 50,000 foot view from Bethany and myself, and then the nitty gritty with Chris and all that he deals with, because as many of you guys know, in these development deals, the largest risk sits in the acquisition, and that risk is with our own money to get through that acquisition and entitlement process. And that's why I think it's so fascinating for people to learn what's entailed there. So Chris, yeah, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing.
Yeah, so to give myself a little bit of an introduction, again, I'm Chris Font with Hammerhead Capital. We are the development partner in our group. So we act as the developer, land acquisition, and sort of the general contractor for the project. My background, I've got about 15 years or so of various facets of the development industry, from residential all the way to industrial, from site selection for industrial projects to planning, master planning communities, and developing communities as well. My background in education is I'm a landscape architect, and a background in construction as well. So that, this sort of specialty during the development process is something I sort of regrettably have grown accustomed to liking in sort of a sick way. But the entitlement process can be challenging, head scratching at times, and depending on what municipality you're dealing with. But it's the Achilles heel of getting a project moving forward, and always your what should be your go or no go on your project acquisition, other than your typical due diligence that you have to do.
So Chris, I am always buying up season, down season, I'm always buying properties. And one of the things that always looks enticing is land. I think, oh, I could build this. Oh, I could build this. Oh, I could build this. And then I have so many agents. Oh, Bethany, it's already zoned for this. You can go ahead and build your build to rent there. They won't have a problem. How true is that statement when those agents tell me that?
In my experience, I won't speak about your agents, but an agent will facilitate a sale. And while they might not be nefarious or trying to pull one over on you, they might not fully understand what it is you're trying to do and how that might fit into the actual zoning or ordinances in the municipality in which you're trying to do a project. Just having one thing zoned residential doesn't mean you can do BTR. And we'll get into the dirt a little bit on that. But it's, that's one thing you have to go in and find what it is you can and can't do down to the letter of the law in your zoning ordinances where you're trying to do something. And oftentimes you'll find that BTR isn't fully accommodated in most zoning ordinances. And so you have to be a little bit creative.
And Bethany, so there'll be an audience here that's BTR. What is that exactly? Obviously, just really quickly, it's been going on for many years. After 2008 crash, a lot of Wall Street started buying up a bunch of homes in many spots. Then they kind of made more money off the money that they lost, all of us. But then it made sense. Hey, why are we not building? And so for 10 years, we haven't been building anything. Let's build single family homes and manage them like communities. So maybe we take 100 units to 300 units, manage them with the amenities, the dog parks, the walking trails, the playgrounds, and have a community of single family homes really kind of managed like a multifamily project. So
yeah, so definitely build to rent is a community of single family homes. Think of like horizontal multifamily. So instead of building a 100-unit building that we have to wait for all 100 units to be done to get that certificate of occupancy, the moment we have one house done, we can place a family and we can continue doing that throughout the whole thing. So in that respect, it goes a lot quicker and faster. But Chris, on the other side note of that is, do municipalities like build to rent? Do they have a preference as they'd rather have a multifamily that's 100 unit or 100 single family homes? Do you see any difference there?
Absolutely. So some like it and some don't like it. I would say the ones that don't like it don't understand it. The ones that like it, I'll use a town we did, or we have a project ongoing currently where we went to go before the planning commission for a project for a build to rent, and we were signing up and submitting our applications at the same time that 1,800 multifamily units were also signing up. And what happened with that, and a bunch of other production builders are also had subdivisions on the docket as well. And what happened was it was a tertiary market, smaller municipality, and they got overwhelmed with what was being brought before them. So they kind of put their hands up and said, hey guys, there's too much happening at once. This is too fast. It's a bunch of multifamily. We need to kind of step back and sort of look at this holistically. And, in that case, they started throwing around the moratorium word. What helped us in that particular case was we were coming in with a rental product, but it was built to rent. And it was something that the design of which played into what the planners at the city would have liked to, how they would like to see their city grow, that type of development. And, we sort of got to skate in under this moratorium with the fact that, we sort of played into the city's kind of wants and needs and had a lot of the things that they were worried about with other developments addressed within our submittal. So in that particular case, we gave the city something they liked and they were in full support of. And so it was very beneficial to us, through that process. We didn't have to sit and wait and and go through a bunch of extra hurdles. Now, having said that, there was still the hurdle of, we went to them with a build to rent concept, which they didn't have a zoning for, the type of densities or anything like that. And on that one, we entitled it as a single property, not as individual lots. So that, again, we did have hurdles, but they're logistical hurdles. And that one, it was a pushback.
Sorry to interrupt, just for everybody. So density, just the number of units that you could build on that space, is that kind of what you're referring to? 8 or 9 units per acre is kind of like where we would like to be. This particular city has their plan in place. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about maybe some more of the details on the process of, how many revisions and what you need to, what your buy box is, and then how typical is it to deviate? Almost always, I would imagine. But
so I'll take a step back and jump back to the 50,000 foot view. There's a book called Tactical Urbanism. If any of you are familiar with that, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, buy it. It is essentially, the term tactical urbanism means go in, look at your ordinances and development code, and essentially find the loopholes of definitions, or find ways to do the thing you need to do by looking for nuances or technicalities in the development code. When you go into any municipality and they don't have what you need, then that's has to be your approach. You have to be tactical in it, and you have to be careful in which the way you approach it and that you present. So jumping back into this particular project that we're talking about, we went in, the development code didn't allow for what we wanted. So what we found they had a townhome zoning, which by definition wasn't what we were doing. But we applied with the townhome zoning because we couldn't get the density. And the density will come down to, typically a development code will have a minimum lot size you can have. So to get our density, we had to have small side setbacks. That's the distance between the lot line and the building, front setbacks and rear setbacks. And again, that's the building to the front lot line and back lot line. So we couldn't fit our density with the typical residential zoning. So we looked at the townhome zoning, and we noticed there was a development that happened 2 years prior to ours that did the same thing. So we had a precedent. And so we went to the city and said, hey, we found this precedent, and we would like to do a layout like this. And again, I'll pause for a second. We haven't bought the land yet. We are entitling it as part of our contract period to close on the land. So we have a contingency on getting our entitlement. So we have to move quickly. So back into the process. So we submit that, and they come back and say, oh, we were aware of this loophole in that zoning where people could come in and do higher density single family residential using the townhome zoning. And they said, oh, we fixed that last month. You have to connect your structures. You can't have detached single family if you're going to go by that, definition. And so, that killed that. So it's back to the drawing board. So we went back and, approached the city and said, here's what we would like to do. And we sat down. It was out of state. Brought my engineer, my planner, and had a discussion. And, our developments, we follow a certain principles called new urbanism. I won't get too much into that, but it's more of walkable communities and high density. And so we're talking about this to the city, and they're like, yes, we want to see more of this, but I pointed out you don't have any zoning that accommodates it. So what we did is they came up with a zoning that would work for us, and that they would allow us to submit for. And so we submitted for a PUD multifamily. So that would be a planned unit development multifamily. In a planned unit development, you typically, what you submit as part of your development plan is your zoning ordinance. And so if you say, I'm going to have roads here, lots subdivided like so, and setbacks, of this distance and this sort of density, and basically that's all laid out, and then this number of lots or units, that becomes codified and adopted as an ordinance for your particular piece of property. So that's a planned unit development. So that's what we did in this case, but still for the residential single family planned unit development, we still couldn't do it. So we had to go multifamily. Since
Well,
we're
Chris,
one.
it sounds like I'm hearing a couple different things. First off, I'm hearing you were already having to be outside of the box because none of their codes that the city, if you looked at the codes and the ordinances, none of them seemed to fit what we wanted to do. So instead of you simply coming to the city and say, we want to do this, and them tell you no, you instead said, we want to do this, and this is how we think it could be done. And you brought another similar scenario to them and said, we could do this exact same thing, only tweak this, do this, do this. And then therefore allowing their job to be easier. And doesn't everybody want their job to be easier?
Absolutely. And another sort of nuance in that process is we didn't go in dictating to the city how they should approach it. What we did was we brought them the scenario, like you're saying, here's a precedent and here's what we're trying to do. Here's how we think it could work. How does this best work for you? So to make this work and to be something you're comfortable with, here's what we have, is there a different way you want to look at it or structure it to make it work and, something you're comfortable with. So that's, the other thing is that you need to have them participate because you need the city to be your friend through the process, especially if you want to do repeat projects in that municipality. I know of lots of developers in various areas that aren't looked at highly or thought of in a favorable manner from the city or whatever jurisdiction they're in. And that's not an approach we take. We like to be partners with, our governmental agencies that we have to deal with.
Yeah, Bethany, if I could ask Chris, because I'm always fascinated by the mechanics of, so when you say the municipalities that you want to work with, maybe in kind of a condensed way, what are those characteristics of a municipality that you want to work with? And then what kind of the competency typically of these people that you're dealing with and how you present your information?
Well, that's all over the map. And it's going to depend city to city. You might have two cities that are a suburb of a major metro that are worlds apart in how they operate as a government. But you can go in and when you look at a jurisdiction, county, parish, municipality, or a large city, you can go in, you can research the elected officials, everybody's listed on their website and start calling around asking questions. But the best thing to do to get a true barometer reading is find out who's doing projects in the area from an engineering or planning standpoint. The people that go to the meetings and negotiate with these municipalities, that's typically your engineers. And you find those and they will tell you exactly how you need to approach something, typically what you can't do, how you should do it, if you have to step carefully. But going in, you're kind of at the mercy of the political climate at times. So you can have a municipality that's pro-development, but if you apply with your project at a sensitive time politically, if there's an election happening and you're doing something that's not a typical project, then you might run into some issues. We've had that happen. So there's a lot of nuances to that. I wouldn't say there's a bullet list you can go to for is a municipality good for development or not. But you can read through development code. Typically, if you're doing a project that fits in all the definitions, it's pretty straightforward. You shouldn't have many issues. But again, with our build to rent model, we don't fit in many buckets. So it's always a challenge.
Well, so keeping that in mind, actually, let's kind of talk through that. Why all three of us have had this conversation before we even started. What issues were we trying to address?
Oh, you mean before we started building
Yeah.
build to rent?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one, the education part on how we get this communicated to people, because it is foreign to a certain degree. But the other thing is, how do you explain to people the that automatically think of the risk when they hear the word development? How do you kind of work through that with folks? And again, it comes back to the education, but you're kind of in a, what is Sisyphean battle of always, kind of rolling the rock up and you've got to have some resiliency, which is why I'm so fascinated when I meet people like Chris, because there would be so many people in this business of real estate. Most people think it's much more fun than they thought, but they also think it's much harder than they thought. And the reason it's so much harder is because, like Chris said, you're dealing with people and politics and incentives. And we were kind of in the middle. I'd be curious to hear, Chris. I want to get back to your question, Bethany, but when we were talking about the political climate, there was some delays, and there were, a couple of cantankerous guys that said the last minute of getting our crest or one of our projects approved, that said, "Hey, look, I don't know. I talked to Bill on Tuesday at Denny's, and he's not really super happy about what we're doing. And instead of going to you, they're going to the other guys. And we deal with this in all of our organizations, including our families, right? Just extended families, etc." So there's a lot of that part of it too. But that's what I would say, Bethany, the education part.
Well, I
What were
think
you going to say?
the other big thing too is we were trying to address the workforce housing. We knew at the end of the day, there wasn't enough housing across this market, across all of the United States. There was a huge demand for housing. The inventory kept shrinking, and it was specific to workforce housing. So if everybody looks back at COVID, and the only projects that were getting pushed through during COVID oftentimes wasn't workforce housing, it was luxury and custom. And so those products weren't necessarily meeting the demand or the need. So now you have massive amounts of people moving, say, out of California, moving to Texas, Alabama, Florida, and those areas don't have enough housing in the first place for the people that are already there. And now you want to add thousands more to it. So for us, we wanted to find a way to meet the demand in a very scalable way. And so that's why we were looking at build to rent, is look, how can we do this the quickest way possible and do it in a way that's scalable, that we can do it again and again and again, over and over and over, so we can help all these cities that are struggling. Because it wasn't just like it was one city. Multiple cities saw massive growth and continue to see that.
Yeah, and
So
if you start from kind of the funnel, you say, okay, there's a housing crisis, right? That's, a lot of that's in California, but it's just a countrywide problem, right? Because we haven't been building for 10 years. And then you take it even a little bit smaller and you say, wow, we've got, in the Southeast where everybody wants to be now, right? We've got more space there. We've got more development friendly areas. So that kind of brings it even a little bit more into focus. And I always say what we couldn't have predicted was this gap of the mortgage that one is paying to the rent that one is paying, which it keeps increasing, right? So now you've got even more people coming in that want built to rent. And then you've got the older people that are living longer. They're staying. They want, Chris to cut their grass, but they're staying. And I think all of those things kind of come into play. COVID was an accelerant in the sense that, oh, you mean everybody from 2019, 2020 even probably locked in a rate at 2.2, 2.5% in their mortgage. So they're not going anywhere. And that's 42% of the people that are living in homes, right? In households. That's 130 million households. So now you've got more disposable income. If you kind of think about, hey, I'm paying what I should have been at the 4.5% rent. So there's all this money that's coming in. That's part of the reason I'm fed up with the Fed on some of the way. I think they're always a little slow and always a little bit slow. Maybe they overreact, but all of these factors started to come into play that made sense for what Chris has been doing his whole life for everybody else. So that's the kind of piece that, Bethany, you and I had so many conversations about. Well, is it really right for we're going to go into development here? But yeah, this is what I've been doing. I've been in development since 2008, but it never made sense like this.
Right. Right, exactly. And I was always very, very development because I knew a lot of developers and I saw a lot of bad developers. So Chris, let's talk about that.
You're cutting out a little bit, Bethany.
Let's
Um,
let's assume I know absolutely nothing. Let's assume I don't know anything and I decide I'm going to go buy a piece of land. In the 50,000 foot level, if you were to say it, how would I go about finding out if I could do build to rent on that land? And what would that process look like?
Well, let's step back for 1 second. And you touched on something right before that on, and you broke up a little bit, so I didn't get the full comment, but there's good and bad development. The sort of pitfall that a lot of people that go into the development world are they know enough to get going, and that's about it. And so it's kind of the old adage, know enough to be dangerous. But you can go in and where a lot of people get stuck is in that for sale model. And I operated in that for a long time, and saw some good and bad projects, participated in some good and bad projects. When you go in and you're trying to get something done, say a typical subdivision that fits an ordinance, and you build it, and then what? If you didn't have a production builder lined up, somebody to buy the lots from you to build the homes, then you're stuck sitting on infrastructure and paying interest on it. And you might be selling, 8 to 10 lots per year, and you're just getting annihilated. Going in and sort of not knowing your consumer. Your consumer is the home builder, if you're developing lots in that scenario. And that stands true for any business. Is you need to, before you go into something, understand, and this is business 101, understand your consumer, understand what they want and how to get it to them. Moving it back into the build to rent sector, at the 50,000 foot view, you need to be looking at areas with strong rental markets, and a metric, sort of an oversimplified metric we like to follow is housing starts. So we look for growing populations, strong job economies, good rental numbers, and then housing starts. So what that's telling you is there's a strong residential market. It's a growth market. We do know there's a shortage of housing stock nationwide currently. So really, you need to be looking for municipalities that are expanding and not contracting. The other thing you're looking at for build to rent is it's different than that for sale model I was just talking about. You have some, I guess, almost built-in contingencies for the fact that you are doing the whole project like a multifamily project rather than a lot for sale type of scenario, because what you're building is a rental product that you want to stabilize, and whether you hold on to it or sell it, that's part of your model. That's something you could consider when looking at land. So you have a little more tolerance for things that maybe wouldn't make a project work for a single family for sale subdivision, because your profit there is on your lot. So you have a per lot profit. So when you sell the lot, you want to be making, however your model's set up, 25 to 30% IRR on that, which is really hard to hit, especially now after price increases. And there's not a lot of margin for, extraneous things. In the build to rent market, you are doing a sort of whole encompassing package of a development. So you're looking at something, you want to take some of the things you look at for multifamily and the things you look at for single family detached. And the 50,000 foot view, you're looking for something from physical characteristics to market characteristics. I talked about market a little bit. Location obviously is always key, but you pay for location. And so you're going to have a threshold in your pro forma and your modeling or your underwriting of your allowable cost of land per unit and your allowable cost of development per unit. The location is very important for build to rent. We want to be seen more like a multifamily, not tucked away like a nice quaint subdivision. So your land tends to be a little more expensive, but you do, these projects are typically a little smaller in size, even though their density might be, or their unit count might be the same as a much larger in size subdivision of single family detached. But you've got a lot more ability and sort of wiggle room to, again, like I said, have a higher land cost going in. But you do want to be near infrastructure. So if you're located in a visible area and you have access to water and sewer and other things you'll need for the project, you're going to pay for that. Otherwise, you'll be doing extensive offsite infrastructure expenditures.
All right, Chris, let me ask you, so because we've had some experiences now where we're right in the thick of it. So before COVID, we kind of underwrote to the supply issues that we were maybe going to deal. Lumber was at 1,500, 1,000 square foot or 1,000 foot board. Then we couldn't get kitchens, we couldn't get appliances. That's changed, by the way. Now people are looking at data. It started to come back down to earth. You can finally get your appliances, but other things went up, like concrete went up. So when you're managing all this, like let's take Crest as a case study. What were some of the things along the way that nothing really surprises you, but that you couldn't have predicted? Whether it's costs, maybe a little bit more specifics about, we had the retention pond issue. I mean, things that come up that bring people into what this process looks like.
So there were, in development, you're going to have a lot of things that might scare you the first time you experience them. So things like on the Crest, it was a piece of land that was in a growth corridor where it was very cheap, and it was a little extended away from sewer infrastructure. But we went ahead with the project because the numbers worked. So as you start moving forward, you do things like geotechnical investigations. And so that's where you bore holes in the ground, you test the soils. And as opposed to a developer selling lots, we care very much about the stability of the soils, because our streets are private in our developments, and we're owning all the structures. So we want things to sit on the ground nicely and firmly. In that case, we had the area where we planned our retention pond, the boring there showed, unfavorable fill material for the rest of the site. So in that case, we had to import structural fill from offsite, which was an added cost. But again, we did account for construction contingencies. And so that was covered, in that scenario.
For folks that are listening, this is about 100 unit built to rent project on about 12 acres, I think.
11 or 12 acres, yeah. And on that one, we also were too far from sewer for it to make sense. So we're building a sewer plant locally on site, and then we're going to turn it over to the utility. We had horrible timing in that particular submittal for our environmental application for the sewer plant. The state environmental agency changed a requirement for the water body that we would eventually have our effluent, get into. And we went from a sort of typical cost for a sewer plant to needing to build one that nearly outputs potable water. Which that's our joke, is we
Water
can
you
drink
can drink,
water.
you mean?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
we can drink the water out of the sewer plant at the Crest. So that was a bit of a scare as an increased cost. But the real kicker on that one is we had to change contractors for the sewer plant, because the contractor originally couldn't do that level of filtration. And what happened in this scenario was the engineer for our sewer plant contractor and the engineer for the city or for the utility, have worked on the opposite sides of lots of projects, and they didn't particularly care for each other. And it got into a back and forth that ultimately led to delays, lots of delays between these two engineers. And by the time we got, moving forward with everything, we're blowing and going on construction, and then we get hit by a 2-month period of rain. Again, this all sounds awful, but it's very typical in the development world. You're at the mercy of the elements and of people, being people, as we mentioned earlier. That got us behind schedule. So, in the case where had this one thing not happen, so if we had good structural fill, we wouldn't have had to spend extra time bringing in outside fill. If the state agency hadn't changed their requirement, we wouldn't have to change engineers for the sewer plant, and that wouldn't have led to this other delay, which led to this other delay, which led to another delay. It snowballs. Those sort of things, it's not unique to that one particular project. That's typical in the development world. Those projects that go exactly as you schedule them.
I haven't had one yet, so I'm not as good at this as.
I wouldn't call them unicorns, but you expect the unexpected, and you have contingencies for certain things, whether it's the contractor. Well, let's back up a couple of years. We had a couple of years where other developer I worked with, the site contractor couldn't get on site to perform work because they didn't have labor. They had machines sitting on their lot and nobody to run them. And so projects were just sitting there because there's no people. And you're at the mercy of those sort of things, which again, it's seems scary, but that is the development game. And touching on price, you mentioned that as well. The price increases we had on, say, the Crest in particular, we had our pro forma done before 2021 happened. Where in the latter half, we had prices just start to skyrocket. And, we rode up through the price increases. But luckily, our delay has us on the back end, where by the time we start buying all the lumber for the houses, we'll be back at normal areas. But when lumber was skyrocketing and the horizontal infrastructure costs were skyrocketing, it's a little nerve-wracking watching something like that happen. But you have to be able to, everything goes up and down. It's not just going to skyrocket and take off. You have to ride it and be patient.
Yeah, one thing that I think is interesting, Bethany, about Built to Rent is that, you mentioned it earlier that we build a unit and then we leased a unit, right? And we've been lucky in some of our projects that rents have been pretty steady, and so we've been able to kind of, get through some of those storms. But I think the other thing about Built to Rent that most people don't think about when they think about development is the economy gets worse, etc. We can roll up our tents and we can hang out and wait, collect income on those few units that are built, not paying on any draws, etc. So you have a few more kind of exit strategies there too, that most developments, you have a half-built multifamily project that doesn't have a C of O or certificate of occupancy. That doesn't do you any good. But in some of these projects, we do have those opportunities.
Yeah, well, and I think too, so Chris, what I hear you saying is any developer that's worth their salt recognizes there's going to be challenges. They do not expect everything to go according to schedule. They don't expect, now granted, some of the things, like who would expect that no workers would show up? Nobody would have known that the president was going to substantially increase everybody and encourage them to stay home and never work again. So those kinds of things weren't necessarily something they would have, but there have been times, right, of labor strikes and things, not uncommon, or if the prices get too high because there's not enough projects, or sometimes too many projects. We've had a lot of our guys that I've had to fight to keep them because they can go here and make more money. And, we've had to negotiate back and forth and back and forth, and sometimes renegotiate because there was so much, it's like feast or famine sometimes. So recognizing that and the value there. But I think the biggest thing too is if you have that experience, you're going to build in some contingencies. Just like you said, it sounds scary, but it was built into our budget, right? So when the soil thing came back, okay, so we're going to need to bring in some soil. There's going to be an additional cost. Okay, this is going to have to happen. Okay, so now our sewer plant is going to be a little bit more expensive than we hoped, and it's going to take a bit more on the time side of things. So if that's the case, and you're stepping back and looking at a project, if you're looking at guidelines, again, just guidelines, we're not talking unicorns, right? So let's just say guidelines. If I go and buy a piece of land, what would you say would be the average amount of time? Because I just had one of my developer buddies up in the Seattle area take 3.5 years just to get his permits. Hasn't broken ground. That was just to get his permits. So what would you say is the average time it takes to go from raw land to entitled, now you can do something with it?
I'm not going to say average and set any unrealistic expectations. But
give us the rules of thumb. This is what I love about developers. Like, they think of all the machinations. Same with contractors too. All the machinations. Well, this goes wrong. This goes wrong. And they never give us a rule of thumb. Like, these guys are, most people who hopefully on this call will develop with somebody who has a team. But rules of thumb.
So during your entitlement processes, the main thing to remember is you have to go before a planning commission typically, and or a city council. Those are public meetings, and so they have deadlines to submit your paperwork. So you have an application, you have your application fee. In your submittal, you need to have understood their ordinances. And like we talked about earlier, have gone through some preliminary meetings to know that you're submitting the most appropriate thing for your project. And so that's after you've done all that and you've done your meetings, in-person meetings with the city, that still doesn't get your entitlements. Then you have to submit formally before a planning commission and be heard publicly. So the public is there. They've gotten public notices. They can stand up and say, hey, I oppose this project. It's in my backyard. And how is this going to affect me? And if they have a legitimate concern, that can table the first meeting. So, I've been in meetings in that scenario where we're submitting something and a bunch of people get up and they don't understand what's happening and the meeting goes just off the rails. And so the, planning commission chair, raises their hands like, I vote to defer this, and they ask you, the applicant, or do you want to defer this to a later date? And you say, absolutely, yes, because you can see the faces on the planning commission members and you see that you're losing them because they also are voted in. And the people that vote are, in a tussle and, in a tizzy out in the audience, and they want to, appease them and make sure that they feel like they're heard, which is their job. And so, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing or against what you're doing, but you do have to navigate that. You have to navigate, it's kind of like navigating consumer sentiment in the market. You have to navigate the public's sentiment to the reception of your project in that space. So that I'm just talking about the first meeting. And so we go through that, and typically there's a period there, that's a 30-day period, and you will have had to have submitted probably 15 days before that 30-day period started. So say that's 45 days. And then you typically have a final, if some structures, it'll be 1 to 3 meetings with the planning commission. And, if it's 2 meetings, again, just double that time. You won't need the extra 15 days. So say you're at 75 days. Then you make that, you've gotten accepted, and that gets pushed to to a city council. So the planning commission approves your project and recommends it for approval to the city council. So then you, depending on the schedule of the city council and their submittal deadlines, you might have another 30 to 45 to maybe 60 days before you're actually in a meeting in front of the city council. And if that goes well, we're just sitting at 3 to 4 months, 4 months maybe, if all goes well. If you have spent 3 months prior, with a sort of not typical project, trying to figure out how to submit or do your due diligence on the property, now you're looking at 7 months. If you go through, say, an election period and people don't want to approve your project and they keep throwing roadblocks at you, be they, lawful or unlawful requests by the city, that can still slow you down. And again, like I said, you're trying to keep a good relationship with your municipalities. So it can be as fast as 3 months. It can take up to a year. It can take up to 3 years. It's a dance. It's a delicate game, but that's why I can't give you an average. There's not just a.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting because we were doing stuff in California, right? So that might be 3 years after you get that first meeting of a bunch of other municipalities and neighborhood councils, etc. So it's part of the reason that the Southeast makes sense, because if you can find those markets that are favorable to development and proactive, you can hopefully speed up the process. So for the audience, we would say after the entitlement's done, and again, that's the hearing, right? That's the planning commission to the city council, and they got to vote on it. And one old guy, says no, but 6 others say yes, right? And then after that, we can go with engineering, environmental. Typically, how long would you say that what's involved in that process, and what should people know about that after the hearing and the approvals are done?
So I know I keep doing lots of tangents. I'll throw in one thing back in the entitlement thing, dealing with city council people or anybody in the public that's commenting on your project. Never blow anyone off. Make sure that, and it's same kind of things that you would apply to parenting, is make sure that the public that has a comment, or the council person, or the mayor, or the planning commission member, knows that you hear them, and that their concerns are also your concerns. And being dismissive in any scenario like that, I've seen it happen a ton of times. I'm always in meetings with other developers, and especially if you're from out of state, and you're dismissive, you will not be received well. So keep that in mind when you're trying to move through these processes. Now, past entitlement, so that we just talked all about entitlement. Engineering is the easy part. Engineers know what to do. You've gotten your due diligence hopefully done at this point, or you're performing some studies like a phase 1 environmental, your geotech, that's your soil samples or wetlands study. If you're dealing with flood zone, you'll have to deal with that. Traffic impact studies, drainage studies, all these things play into engineering. Your engineering should take typically 3 to 4 months. If it takes more time than that, it's because you had some sort of regulatory issues where you couldn't, say, set a particular elevation on your engineering construction drawings because you couldn't get this one offsite thing sort of nailed down or solidified that had sort of a snowballing chain link effect across your project. So there's those kind of issues you'll run into. But getting permitting, with which, Bethany, that was your comment on the person you knew that got permits 3 years after their entitlements, or I guess their purchase. That's on your engineers. So your engineers submit for your construction permits. A good engineer will work with the cities and the engineers that that they're having to submit these things to. Kind of like what I said. This is why I brought it up with the make sure that you're working with the cities, not against them, not being dismissive. You want to know that your engineers are doing the same, because a city, they get lots of applications. If they have a problem engineer or developer, you're not going to be their priority. And so that causes delays. So that's, the other thing is keeping things cordial with your cities and municipalities, and also staying on top of your engineers and being in constant communication with them. Lots of people are busy these days, but it's just like anything. You manage, follow up, follow up, follow up. But yeah, once you get through engineering and you've gotten your permits in a good scenario, you can get your permits within 2 months of submitting everything, or within 1 month in some cases. But what we'll typically do is, while you're submitting, you've gotten your construction sets to a level that you're comfortable with for costing, is you get your bids then. So when you first start submitting for your permits, have your contractors lined up and get your bid packages to them. And then any changes that are made, in the interim, before you get your permits, you'll have them amend their bids with that. But you need to get on their schedule, because if you wait until you get your permit and then start talking to people, they might be booked up for 3 months, and so you've added another 3 months, to your timeline. So those are kind of some of the things to sort of think about during that stage.
Yeah, Bethany, I think you probably want to open up, questions. I always like geeking out on that process. Most people are probably bored by it, but I always think it's so fascinating. So sorry if people are have their own questions that they want to get answered.
No, yeah. So the number one question that everybody has asked so far is why all they hear is the negativity. This can be delayed, and this can be delayed, and this can be delayed, and this can be. And if you don't play nice in their sandbox, then they kick you out of the sandbox, and so all they're hearing is the negative. Chris, why would you keep doing this? There's got to be some good to it that makes you want to keep doing this. What is it?
Profit. We're a business. It's personally, I love the field. It's not work for me. I absolutely love it, but I guess why I'm focusing on all the delays and I guess we'll call it negative, but I call them opportunities for solutions. So when you're encountering opportunities for solutions, that's where you grow as a professional in this field, and that's how you plan ahead on other projects, and you can tailor your approach, especially if you're working in the same jurisdiction, the same metro area, where you're kind of familiar with the processes, the way things work in that particular area. But again, we're a business, and so you want to kind of keep all that stuff kind of in the forefront of your mind. But when things are going as they should, which more or less often they are moving that direction, it's great. And then successfully putting a project on the ground and seeing it go from raw land to a completed project, be it a spec house that you're building, or a commercial strip center, or a built to rent community, or multifamily, or an industrial park. It doesn't matter. It's if you are listening today, you're interested enough to be excited about that, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's an industry, real estate and development that's not going away, and there's a whole lot of upside. And where you get a lot of upside is if you're going from raw land and doing the entitlements and going all the way to the finished project. You're realizing that upside all the way through. And I would say, I don't know if I've fully answered the question, but
yeah, well, I think that the other thing, Bethany, that I find so fascinating about seeing a project start is now then you see people walking down the sidewalks, and these people calling this place that you built their home, and you're seeing the playground, and you're seeing the walking trail, and you're seeing the doggy door and the dogs bar. It's just a pretty special thing to create something out of nothing, right?
Yeah.
Or what God gave us to create something that's better. It's a pretty rewarding experience. And in every industry there's risks and rewards, but I think that development today we've stripped a lot of that risk away because of the way that the market's turning, the way that Wall Street now favors the build to rent. There's an article I read in Realtor, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I mean, we're talking about the number of actual units that were short is now closer to in the 6 million range. And so a large part of that is in that Southeast area where Chris and you, we are building. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, we lose focus of from time to time because we're constantly solving problems. But eventually you solve enough problems and you create something special for people. It's pretty rewarding.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, one of the things that I was just in downtown Houston today, and to look out from the 25th floor of this building and to see the plan, the work, the effort. Sure, the people that put that time and energy in during it, it could have easily focused on all the negative and the negative this and the negative that, but instead they kept their eye on the prize, which was the end goal. And in turn, they've got a massive city that has, you know, a very good infrastructure that can move people in and out for work. And you know, they've developed a system that other cities are still working through. I see that in Seattle. They've been working on it for years. And the difference is when those people kind of dig in and go, okay, no, we want to solve a problem, but we want to do it the best way possible. And I think that's what's so amazing about what we're doing with the build to rent as well is, okay, how can we do this quickly? How can we do it efficiently? How can we do it in a way that's scalable? And so I think that's kind of the thing too, is how can we reduce the risk so that we can bring as much return to these investors as possible? So those that chose to come alongside us during that risk, right, and saw that bigger vision with us, that they get that reward as well. And that's what's always exciting to me, is to be able to recognize that, look, we have an opportunity that now we can share with you, and we're willing to do that hard work and in turn reward you just alongside us. So that's always exciting as well. And so I've gone ahead, I know we are out of time, so I've gone ahead and I've put our contact information in the chat. So any of you guys that have further questions that you'd like to reach out to Andy or myself, those contact information is in there. You can obviously find us on LinkedIn, or our emails are in there as well. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Chris. I always learn more every time I talk to Chris. And yes, although I feel a little less knowledgeable, I gain more knowledge when I leave. So it's always a good conversation for sure. Even if I have to look past the jargon sometimes. So if the jargon hung you up, reach out to us. We'll define it for you and help you out. And also, we're going to be sending out notes from this for those of you. I know many of you guys were driving and whatnot. This was during your lunch hour. So we'll send out notes to those that registered for this. And then we can turn around and get those out there. So if you guys have further questions beyond that, you want to reach out to any of us in regards to the build to rent, we'd be happy to do so. So thanks again so much, guys. I hope you guys have a great day. I'll look forward to getting together another time and definitely again.
Thanks, Bethany. Great stuff, Chris.
Have a great day, you guys. Thanks, Chris.
Y'all have a good one.
Bye-bye.
All right, is recording stop? Jordan, where do I get those pants, man? No answer. All right, we'll see you guys soon. Take care, everybody.
See you guys.